The wheel cracked with a sound like a gunshot, and Natalie Jennings felt her heart drop as her wagon lurched sideways on the dusty mountain trail, spilling half her supplies across the rutted path in the autumn afternoon of 1878. She sat there for a moment, hands still gripping the reins, feeling the weight of exhaustion settle over her shoulders like a heavy blanket. The mule stamped and snorted, equally frustrated by this latest misfortune. Natalie had been traveling for 3 days from Randsburg, California, making her way to the small homestead she had inherited from her uncle, and now this. The wheel had finally given out, just as she had feared it might since she first noticed the crack 2 days ago. At 22 years old, Natalie had learned to be resourceful. Her father had taught her basic wagon repair before he passed, and she had the tools somewhere in the mess of supplies now scattered on the ground. She climbed down carefully, her legs stiff from hours of sitting, and assessed the damage. The wheel had split clean through one of the spokes, and the iron rim had bent slightly. It would need more than a simple fix. The sun was beginning its descent toward the peaks of the Sierra Nevada, casting long shadows across the pine-covered slopes. She had maybe 3 hours of good daylight left, and the nearest town was a full day's journey back the way she had come. Her homestead, according to the map her uncle's lawyer had given her, was still half a day ahead. She was well and truly stuck. Natalie rolled up the sleeves of her worn calico dress and began gathering her scattered supplies. Flour sacks, a crate of preserves, her trunk of clothes, cooking pots, and tools. Everything she owned in the world spread across a mountain trail in the middle of nowhere. She refused to cry. Tears had never fixed anything, her mother used to say, and Natalie had learned that lesson well in the years since both her parents had died. She was kneeling beside the broken wheel, trying to figure out if she could jerry-rig something temporary, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching from upslope. Natalie's hand instinctively went to the rifle she kept propped against the wagon seat, but she did not reach for it yet. Out here, a stranger could be help or trouble, and she would not know which until she saw them. The rider came around the bend in the trail, and Natalie found herself staring up at the largest man she had ever seen. He sat astride a massive roan horse that looked powerful enough to pull her wagon by itself, but it was the man who captured her attention. He had to be well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they blocked out a considerable portion of the setting sun. His hair was dark brown and fell past his collar, tied back loosely with a strip of leather. A thick beard covered his jaw, and his arms, visible beneath the rolled-up sleeves of his rough wool shirt, were corded with muscle. He pulled his horse to a stop and looked down at her with eyes the color of pine needles in shadow. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Natalie felt suddenly aware of how she must look, dusty and disheveled, kneeling in the dirt beside her broken wagon. "Wheels broke," the man said finally. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together but not unkind. "Yes," Natalie replied, getting to her feet and brushing the dust from her skirt. "It cracked about 10 minutes ago." The man swung down from his horse with an ease that belied his size. Up close, he was even more imposing. His chest was like a barrel, and his hands, when he reached out to examine the wheel, were huge and scarred from hard work. He smelled of pine smoke and leather and the clean scent of mountain air. "You alone out here?" he asked, his eyes scanning the trail behind her as if looking for traveling companions. "Yes," Natalie said, then added quickly, "I am heading to my homestead. My uncle left it to me. It is not far from here." The man grunted and knelt beside the wheel, running his hands over the damage with surprising gentleness. "This is bad. The spoke is split clean through and the rim is bent. You cannot fix this with what you have got." Natalie's heart sank. "Are you certain? I have tools. I thought perhaps I could bind it with wire and some wood from the spare lumber I am carrying." He looked up at her, and she saw something that might have been respect flicker in those green eyes. "You know wagon repair. My father taught me the basics. I know it is not a proper fix, but I thought it might hold long enough to get me home." The man stood, towering over her again. "I am Quinn Barlow. I have a cabin about 2 miles up the mountain. I have got a spare wheel that will fit this wagon and the tools to put it on right. I can have you fixed up in less than an hour." Natalie hesitated. Everything she had been taught about caution around strangers warred with the practical knowledge that she had few other options. The man seemed to read her hesitation. "I understand if you do not trust me," Quinn said, his tone matter of fact. "But it will be dark soon, and there are bears in these mountains. Grizzlies, mostly. They come down from the high country this time of year, looking to fatten up before winter. You do not want to be stuck out here with a broken wagon when they start moving around after dark." The mention of grizzlies made Natalie's decision for her. She had seen the claw marks on trees along the trail, deep gouges that spoke of enormous strength. "I would be grateful for your help, Mr. Barlow." Quinn nodded and immediately set to work. He unhitched her mule and tied it to a tree, then began unloading the wagon with quick, efficient movements. Natalie moved to help, but he waved her off. "Save your strength. I will have this done faster on my own." She watched as he worked, fascinated despite herself. Quinn moved with a grace unexpected in a man of his size. He lifted her heavy trunk as though it weighed nothing, setting it carefully beside the trail. Within minutes, he had the wagon unloaded and had used some of her rope to fashion a sling under the broken axle. "I am going to lift this now," he said, positioning himself. "Once I have got it up, I will brace it with these logs." Natalie watched in amazement as Quinn simply lifted the entire side of the wagon, his massive arms straining, muscles bulging beneath his shirt. He held it there while she, without being asked, shoved 2 thick branches underneath as braces. When he lowered it, the wagon rested securely on the makeshift supports. "You are very strong," Natalie said, unable to keep the awe from her voice. Quinn shrugged. "Living in the mountains, you learn to do for yourself. I will ride back to my cabin and get that wheel. Should not take more than 20 minutes. Will you be all right here?" Natalie picked up her rifle and checked that it was loaded. "I will be fine." Quinn looked at the rifle, then at her face and nodded. "I believe you will be. I will be back soon." He swung onto his horse and was gone, moving up the trail at a steady trot. Natalie sat down on her trunk and let out a long breath. The encounter had left her feeling oddly flustered. She had met plenty of men in her life, but none quite like Quinn Barlow. There was something about him, a quiet competence and strength, that made her feel safe even though she had known him for less than 15 minutes. She forced herself to focus on practical matters. When Quinn returned with the wheel, she would need to reload the wagon, and it would be better to organize her supplies now while she had the chance. She began sorting through her belongings, setting aside the things that needed to be packed first. True to his word, Quinn returned within 20 minutes. He had a wheel strapped to his horse's saddle, along with a toolbox that looked old but well maintained. He also had a canteen which he offered to Natalie. "You look thirsty," he said. She was. Natalie drank gratefully, the water cold and sweet. "Thank you." Quinn set to work immediately. He removed the broken wheel with quick, sure movements, then fitted the new one onto the axle. Natalie watched as he worked, noting the way his hands moved with practiced ease. He clearly knew what he was doing. Within 40 minutes, he had the new wheel secured and was testing its strength, rocking the wagon back and forth to ensure everything was solid. "That should hold," he said, wiping his hands on his pants. This wheel has plenty of good years left in it. It came off an old freight wagon I salvaged last year. How much do I owe you? Natalie asked, already calculating the meager contents of her purse. Quinn looked surprised. You do not owe me anything. Out here we help each other. That is just how it is. But the wheel, and your time, the wheel was sitting in my barn doing nothing. As for my time, I have got plenty of that. He began loading her supplies back into the wagon, once again refusing her help when she tried to assist. When everything was secured, Quinn stood back and studied the wagon with a critical eye. You said your homestead is not far from here. About half a day's journey, according to the map I was given. It is called the Morrison place. My uncle Thomas Morrison left it to me when he passed 3 months ago. Quinn's expression shifted, something dark passing across his features. The Morrison place, I know it. Your uncle was a good man. I am sorry for your loss. You knew him. Some. He would come into town for supplies every few months and we would talk. He mentioned he had a niece back east. Quinn paused, then added carefully, the homestead has been empty for 3 months. It will need work. Natalie felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach but pushed it down. I expected as much. I'm not afraid of hard work. Quinn studied her for a long moment, his green eyes thoughtful. The sun had nearly reached the horizon now, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It is too late for you to reach the homestead tonight. The trail gets dangerous in the dark, especially with a wagon. There is a clearing about a mile up where you can make camp safely. I will show you. Before Natalie could respond, Quinn had mounted his horse and was moving up the trail. She climbed onto her wagon seat, took up the reins and followed. The new wheel turned smoothly, and the wagon moved without the ominous creaking that had plagued her for the past 2 days. The clearing Quinn led her to was perfect. A small stream ran along one edge, and there was plenty of grass for her mule. A ring of stones in the center showed that others had camped here before. Quinn helped her unhitch the mule and set up her camp with the same quiet efficiency he had shown before. I will gather firewood, he said, disappearing into the trees before Natalie could protest. She used the time to lay out her bedroll and get her cooking supplies organized. She had beans and salt pork, enough for a simple meal. When Quinn returned with an armload of wood, she invited him to stay for supper. I should get back to my cabin, Quinn said, but Natalie could hear the hesitation in his voice. Please, she said. It is the least I can do to thank you for your help. Quinn agreed, and soon they had a fire going. Natalie cooked the beans with some onion and a bit of molasses, and they ate sitting on logs near the fire. The night air was cool and the fire felt good. Above them, stars began to appear in the darkening sky, more stars than Natalie had ever seen in her life. It is beautiful here, she said softly, looking up at the vast expanse of sky. Quinn followed her gaze. It is. Sometimes I forget living up here all the time. It takes someone new to remind me. How long have you lived in these mountains? About 5 years. I came out west after the war, tried my hand at mining for a while, then decided I preferred the quiet of the high country. I trap in the winter, hunt, and sell furs and meat in town when I need supplies. It is a simple life, but it suits me. Natalie heard something in his voice, a hint of old pain perhaps, but she did not press. Instead, she asked, "What can I expect at the Morrison place?" Quinn was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. "Your uncle built a solid cabin. It is small, just 2 rooms, but the construction is good. There is a barn, a chicken coop, and a root cellar. He had about 20 acres cleared for farming, and there is good water from a spring. But 3 months of neglect in these mountains can do damage. You will likely have animals that have moved in, repairs that need doing. The garden will be overgrown, but it is livable. With work, yes. Your uncle was preparing for winter when he passed. The cabin should be weathertight at least. They talked for a while longer, and Natalie found herself enjoying Quinn's company more than she had expected. He was not much for small talk, but when he spoke, his words had weight. He told her about the mountains, warning her about the dangers she would face. Grizzlies, as he had mentioned before, but also mountain lions, wolves, and the simple hazards of isolation. Winter in the high country could be brutal, he explained, and she would need to prepare carefully. The first snow usually comes in November, Quinn said. That gives you about 6 weeks to get ready. You will need to make sure you have plenty of firewood stocked, that your chimney is clear, and that you have enough food to last until spring. Town is 2 days away in good weather, but once the snow starts, it could be weeks before the trails are passable again. Natalie felt a mixture of excitement and fear. She had wanted this, wanted the independence and the chance to make something of her own, but hearing Quinn describe the realities made her realize how much she still had to learn. "Will you help me?" she asked, then immediately regretted the boldness. "I mean, I can pay you for your time, not much," but Quinn held up a hand, stopping her. "I will help you, and I do not want payment. Like I said, out here we help each other. Besides, your uncle was a good man. I reckon he would want someone looking out for his niece." Relief flooded through Natalie. "Thank you, Quinn. That means more to me than you know." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the crackling of the fire and the sounds of the mountain night. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, and Natalie shivered despite the warmth of the fire. "They will not bother you," Quinn said. "Wolves are more afraid of people than people are of them usually. Do not go walking alone in the dark and keep your rifle close. That is just common sense up here." Eventually, Quinn stood and stretched. In the firelight, his shadow was enormous. "I should head back. I will come by the Morrison place tomorrow evening, see how you are settling in." "You do not have to do that," Natalie said, though she was secretly glad he offered. "I want to," Quinn said simply. He looked at her for a long moment, and in his eyes Natalie saw something that made her heart skip. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and disappeared into the darkness. Natalie sat by the fire for a long time after he left, thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. 3 months ago, she had been living in a boarding house in St. Louis, working as a seamstress and barely making enough to pay her rent. Then the letter had arrived from a lawyer in California, informing her that she had inherited a homestead from an uncle she barely remembered meeting once when she was a child. It had seemed like a miracle, a chance to start over, to have something that was truly hers. She had sold everything she could not carry and used the money to book passage west. The journey had been long and difficult, but she had made it. And now, sitting under a sky full of stars with a mountain breeze cooling her face, she felt a sense of possibility she had not experienced in years. The next morning, Natalie woke at dawn to the sound of birds singing in the pines. She made a quick breakfast of biscuits and coffee, packed up her camp, and was on the trail by the time the sun cleared the eastern peaks. The wagon rolled smoothly on its new wheel, and her mule seemed refreshed after a night's rest. The trail climbed steadily, winding through stands of tall pines and across meadows where the last wildflowers of autumn bloomed in patches of purple and gold. Natalie saw deer grazing in the early morning light, and once, high on a rocky outcrop, she spotted what might have been a mountain lion, though it vanished so quickly she could not be sure. Around midday, she reached a fork in the trail. According to her map, she needed to take the left path, which would lead her to the Morrison property. She stopped to let her mule rest and drink from a stream that crossed the trail, eating a lunch of bread and cheese while she studied the map. The Morrison place was marked with a small X on the hand-drawn map, the lawyer had given her. According to the notes, it was situated in a small valley, protected from the worst of the winter winds by the surrounding mountains. There was good timber, good water, and soil that, while rocky, was fertile enough for a decent garden and some livestock. As Natalie continued down the trail, she began to see signs that she was approaching her new home. An old blaze mark on a tree, the remains of a fence line, and finally, through the trees ahead, the shape of a cabin. Her cabin. Natalie's hands tightened on the reins as she guided the wagon through the last stretch of forest and into a clearing. The cabin stood in the center, built of solid logs with a shake roof that looked mostly intact. It was small, as Quinn had said, but it looked sturdy. Beside it stood a barn, also built of logs, and beyond that, she could see the chicken coop and what must be the root cellar, its door set into a hillside. She stopped the wagon in front of the cabin and sat for a moment, just looking. This was hers, her home. The thought filled her with a mixture of pride and terror. Climbing down from the wagon, Natalie approached the cabin door. It was closed but not locked. She pushed it open and stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. The interior smelled musty, but it was dry. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a simple table and 2 chairs set before it. There was a bed frame in one corner, a workbench along another wall, and a doorway leading to what must be the second room. Natalie walked through the cabin slowly, taking inventory. The windows had shutters that closed from the inside, important for winter. The fireplace looked sound, though the chimney would need to be swept. The floor was packed earth but level and solid. In the second room she found storage shelves, currently empty, and hooks on the wall for hanging meat or herbs. Outside again, she checked the barn. It was empty except for some old hay and a few pieces of equipment her uncle had left behind. A plow, some hand tools, a scythe. The chicken coop was in worse shape, with one wall partially collapsed and the roof sagging. The root cellar, when she opened it, was dry and cool, perfect for storing vegetables through the winter. Natalie spent the rest of the afternoon unloading her wagon and beginning to make the cabin livable. She swept out the accumulated dust and debris, washed the windows with water from the spring Quinn had mentioned, which she found bubbling up from rocks about 50 yards behind the cabin. She made up the bed with her own linens, unpacked her cooking supplies, and arranged her few belongings to make the space feel like home. By the time evening approached, she was exhausted but satisfied. She had gathered enough wood for a fire and was starting to prepare supper when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart lifted, and she stepped out of the cabin to see Quinn riding into the clearing. He looked even larger in the open space of the clearing, a giant of a man on a powerful horse. He had his saddlebags loaded with what looked like supplies, and he had a rifle slung across his back. "You made it," he said, dismounting. There was something in his voice that sounded like relief. "I did, thanks to you and your wheel. Would you like to come in? I was just starting supper." Quinn tied his horse and followed her inside. He had to duck slightly to clear the doorway, and once inside, his presence seemed to fill the small space. He looked around, noting the changes she had made, and nodded approvingly. "You have done good work here. The place looks lived in again." "There is still so much to do," Natalie said, suddenly seeing the cabin through his eyes and feeling inadequate. "The chicken coop needs repair, and I have not even looked at the garden yet. I am sure it is a disaster." "One thing at a time," Quinn said. He set his saddlebags on the table. "I brought you some things: smoked venison, some dried apples, and a few potatoes from my own garden. I figured you might be running low on supplies after your journey." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes at the kindness. "Thank you, Quinn. You have already done so much. It is nothing." He looked uncomfortable with her gratitude, shifting his weight. Tomorrow, if you want, I can help you fix the chicken coop, and I will take a look at your chimney. It should be swept before you start using the fireplace regularly." They ate together, the venison Quinn had brought supplementing the beans and biscuits Natalie had prepared. As they ate, Quinn told her more about the area. There was a small community of homesteaders scattered through these mountains, he explained. Most were like him, people who preferred solitude but understood the need for cooperation in hard times. There were about 20 families within a day's ride, and they would gather in town for important occasions or when someone needed help with a big job like a barn raising. "Will they accept me?" Natalie asked. "A woman alone, I mean." Quinn looked at her seriously. "Anyone who knew your uncle will accept you. He was respected. As for the others, you will earn their respect with time and hard work. These are practical people. They care more about whether you can hold your own than whether you are a man or a woman." "I can hold my own," Natalie said with more confidence than she felt. "I know you can," Quinn replied, and the certainty in his voice made her believe it too. After supper, Quinn showed her how to properly bank the fire for the night so it would not go out but would not be a danger either. He checked the door and window latches, making sure they were secure, and pointed out a few minor repairs that needed to be made. "I will come back tomorrow morning," he said as he prepared to leave. "We will get that chicken coop fixed and the chimney swept. After that, we should take stock of what else needs doing before winter." Standing in the doorway, watching Quinn mount his horse in the gathering darkness, Natalie felt an unfamiliar flutter in her chest. He turned in the saddle to look back at her, and even in the dim light, she could see the concern in his eyes. "Keep your rifle loaded and near the bed," he said. "And do not open the door after dark unless you know who is outside." "I will be careful," Natalie promised. She watched until he disappeared into the trees, then closed and latched the door. The cabin suddenly felt very quiet and very small. Natalie checked her rifle, made sure the fire was safe, and climbed into bed fully dressed except for her boots. Sleep was a long time coming, and when it did, she dreamed of green eyes and strong hands and a voice like grinding stones. Quinn arrived just after dawn the next morning, and they set to work immediately. He brought tools and lumber from his own supplies, refusing once again to take payment. Together, they repaired the collapsed wall of the chicken coop and replaced the damaged roof boards. Quinn worked with the same quiet efficiency she had observed before, and Natalie found herself stealing glances at him when she thought he was not looking. He had rolled up his sleeves against the morning warmth, and she could see the play of muscles beneath his tanned skin as he worked. His hands, despite their size and the calluses that spoke of hard labor, moved with surprising delicacy when making fine adjustments to the repairs. When he reached up to nail a board in place, his shirt pulled tight across his chest and shoulders, and Natalie felt her face heat for reasons that had nothing to do with the sun. She forced herself to focus on her own work, holding boards in place while Quinn nailed them, handing him tools when he needed them. They worked well together, she realized. He seemed to anticipate when she would need help, and she learned quickly to read his gestures and the few words he spoke. By midday, the chicken coop was repaired. Quinn stood back and studied it critically, then nodded. "That will hold. Now you just need chickens." "I can buy some in town on my next trip," Natalie said. "No need. I have got more than I need. I will bring you half a dozen hens and a rooster tomorrow." "Quinn, I cannot keep taking from you without giving something in return." He looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "You are not taking. I am giving. There is a difference." They ate lunch sitting in the shade of the cabin, bread and cheese and some of the dried apples Quinn had brought the day before. Natalie asked him about his life before the mountains, and he told her a little, though she sensed he was leaving much unsaid. "I grew up in Virginia," he said. "My father had a farm, nothing fancy, but we got by. When the war came, I joined up. Fought for 4 years, saw things no man should see. When it was over, I could not go back to that farm, could not go back to the man I had been before. So I came west, looking for something different. I found it here." There was pain in his voice, old and deep, and Natalie understood. She had her own sorrows, her own losses. "I am sorry," she said softly. Quinn shrugged his massive shoulders. "It was a long time ago. I am different now. These mountains, they change you. Make you into something harder, maybe, but also something more honest. Out here, you cannot hide from yourself." They spent the afternoon working on the chimney. Quinn climbed onto the roof with an ease that made Natalie nervous, given his size, but he moved with perfect confidence. He dropped a weighted brush down the chimney while Natalie watched from inside, and a shower of soot and debris fell into the fireplace. When they were done, the chimney drew perfectly, and Quinn pronounced it safe for use. "That is the most important thing," he said, washing his hands and face in the basin of water Natalie had drawn from the spring. "A good fire can mean the difference between life and death up here in winter." Over the next few days, Quinn continued to come by daily, always with some excuse. He brought the chickens he had promised, and Natalie was delighted to have the birds scratching around the yard. He helped her clear the overgrown garden and prepare the soil for next spring. He showed her where her uncle had stored firewood and helped her split more from the dead trees scattered around the property. With each passing day, Natalie felt herself growing more capable and more confident. But she also felt something else growing, something that had nothing to do with homesteading and everything to do with the quiet, strong man who had become a daily presence in her life. She caught herself watching him when he worked, admiring the way his body moved, the competence and strength he displayed in everything he did. She found herself listening for the sound of his horse each morning, feeling a rush of pleasure when he arrived. And in the evenings, when he would stay for supper and they would talk by the fire, she felt a contentment she had not known was possible. Quinn, for his part, seemed equally drawn to her company. He began to stay longer each day, finding more tasks that needed doing. He brought her gifts, small things he claimed he had no use for: a bearskin rug that he spread before her fireplace, a set of horseshoes he said her mule would need before winter, a book of poems that he said had been cluttering up his cabin. One evening, about 2 weeks after Natalie had arrived at the homestead, they sat by the fire after supper, and Quinn cleared his throat awkwardly. "I should tell you," he said, not meeting her eyes, "that people in town have started talking." Natalie felt her stomach tighten. "Talking about what?" "About me coming up here every day. About a single woman living alone and a single man visiting regular. You know how people talk." "Let them talk," Natalie said with more bravery than she felt. "You have been helping me, nothing more." Quinn was quiet for a moment, then he looked up and met her eyes. The intensity in his gaze made her heart race. "Is that all it is, Natalie? Just me helping you?" The question hung in the air between them. Natalie knew she should be cautious, should protect herself, but the truth came out before she could stop it. "No, it is not just that, not for me." Quinn stood and crossed the small space between them. He knelt before her chair so that they were at eye level and reached out to take her hand in both of his. His hands were so large they completely engulfed hers, warm and rough and gentle all at once. "Not for me either," he said quietly. "From the moment I saw you on that trail trying to fix that wagon by yourself, I felt something I have not felt in years, maybe never. You are strong and brave and beautiful, and I cannot stop thinking about you." Natalie felt tears well in her eyes. "I think about you too, all the time." I wait for you each morning, and when you leave in the evening, I already miss you." Quinn reached up with one hand to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped. "I am not an easy man, Natalie. I have got a hard past and a simple life. I cannot offer you much in the way of comfort or society." "I do not want comfort or society," Natalie said, leaning into his touch. "I want a life that is real and honest. I want to build something with my own hands. And I want you, Quinn, if you will have me." In answer, Quinn leaned forward and kissed her. His lips were soft despite the roughness of his beard, and the kiss was gentle at first, tentative. Then Natalie reached up to wrap her arms around his neck, pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened. She felt the strength in his arms as they encircled her, felt the heat of his body, and knew with absolute certainty that this was right. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this properly," he said. "Court you the right way so no one can say we did not. Then, if you will have me, I want to marry you." "Yes," Natalie said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes to all of it." And so began the strangest and most wonderful courtship Natalie could have imagined. Quinn came every day, as he had before, but now there was an acknowledged purpose to his visits. He continued to help her prepare for winter, but he also brought her gifts that had nothing to do with practical homesteading. Wildflowers that he must have ridden far to find so late in the season. A necklace made from polished stones that caught the light beautifully. A harmonica so she would have music during the long winter evenings. They talked for hours, sharing their histories and their hopes. Natalie learned that Quinn was 28, 6 years older than she was, and that he had been engaged once before the war, but his intended had married someone else while he was fighting. He told her about the battles he had survived, the friends he had lost, and the way he had felt broken and empty when the war ended. "I thought I would never feel whole again," he admitted one evening. "That is why I came here to these mountains. I thought if I could just be alone, maybe I could find some kind of peace. And I did after a while, but it was lonely too. I just did not realize how lonely until I met you." Natalie shared her own story. How her father had died when she was 18, leaving debts that forced them to sell the family farm. How she and her mother had moved to the city, where her mother had worked herself to exhaustion trying to make ends meet and had died 2 years later. How Natalie had been alone in St. Louis, working long hours for little pay, watching other women find husbands and build families while she remained alone and struggling. "I thought I would live my whole life like that," she said. "Just surviving, never really living." When the letter came about the homestead, it felt like God was giving me a second chance. I was so scared, but I knew I had to take it. And now I am here and I have found you, and it feels like all those hard years led me exactly where I was supposed to be. They kissed often, stolen moments of sweetness that made Natalie's heart soar. But Quinn was always respectful, always proper. He never stayed past dark, and he never pushed for more than she was comfortable giving. His restraint made her love him even more. As October turned into November, the first snows began to fall in the high peaks. Quinn became more insistent about preparing for winter. Together, they stacked firewood until the pile beside her cabin was taller than Natalie. They hung meat in her root cellar, venison and elk that Quinn had hunted and butchered. They made one long trip to town together, where Natalie bought supplies with the little money she had left, while Quinn introduced her to the other homesteaders and ranchers. The people of the community were curious about her, but generally kind. A few women made pointed comments about a single woman living alone, but most seemed to accept Quinn's explanation that he was courting her with intentions to marry. The general store owner, a round man named Harold Stevens, insisted on extending her credit for supplies she could not afford, saying her uncle had been a good customer, and he was confident she would pay when she could. On the journey back to her homestead, the wagon loaded with flour, sugar, coffee, and other necessities, Quinn broached the subject that had been on both their minds. "We should marry before the heavy snows come," he said. "Not just because it is the right thing to do, though it is, but because once winter really sets in, it will be dangerous for you to be alone. If something happened, if you got sick or injured, you could die before anyone found you." Natalie had been thinking the same thing. "When?" "Next week. We can go back to town, have the pastor marry us." "It will not be fancy, but—" "I do not need fancy," Natalie interrupted. "I just need you." They were married the following Saturday in the small church in Randsburg. Natalie wore the best dress she owned, a simple gray wool that she had sewn herself years before. Quinn wore his cleanest shirt and had trimmed his beard for the occasion, though his hair still fell past his collar. They stood before the pastor, a kindly older man named Reverend Thompson, and spoke their vows with hands clasped and eyes locked on each other. A handful of townspeople attended, curious about the quick courtship, but no one objected. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife and told Quinn he could kiss his bride, he did so with a gentleness that brought tears to Natalie's eyes. They spent their wedding night in the boarding house in town, the first time Natalie had shared a bed with a man. Quinn was patient and tender, his strength tempered with careful gentleness. He worshipped her body with his hands and mouth, bringing her pleasure she had not imagined possible. And when he finally made her fully his, Natalie wept with the joy and rightness of it. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his massive chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart, Natalie felt a happiness so profound it almost frightened her. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Quinn rumbled, his deep voice vibrating through his chest. "From the moment I saw you on that trail, I was yours. I just did not know it yet." They returned to the homestead the next day, and Quinn moved his belongings from his cabin to theirs. It took 3 trips to transport everything, and Natalie was amazed at how sparse his possessions were. Clothes, tools, traps, his rifle and pistol, cooking equipment, and very little else. He had lived like a monk in these mountains, she realized, denying himself comfort and companionship. "We can make the cabin bigger," Quinn said, looking around at the crowded space now filled with both their belongings. "Next spring I will add on another room, maybe 2. We will need the space eventually." The implication made Natalie blush. Children. She wanted them, had always wanted them, and the thought of bearing Quinn's children filled her with anticipation. Winter descended on the mountains with a vengeance in late November. The snow that had been falling lightly for weeks became a constant presence. Drifts piled up around the cabin, and the temperature dropped until the water in the wash basin froze overnight, even with the fire going. But inside the cabin, Natalie had never been warmer. She and Quinn fell into an easy rhythm of domestic life. They rose early and worked hard during the short daylight hours, caring for the animals, breaking ice on the water barrel, and keeping paths clear to the barn and chicken coop. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Quinn mending traps or carving while Natalie sewed or read aloud from the books they had between them. And at night, they would make love with increasing passion and familiarity, learning each other's bodies, discovering what brought pleasure and what brought ecstasy. Quinn was insatiable for her, yet always careful, always attentive to her needs. Natalie had never imagined that the physical side of marriage could be so fulfilling, so joyful. By mid-December, Natalie realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited another week to be certain, then told Quinn one evening as they sat by the fire. "I think I am with child," she said quietly. Quinn froze, the piece of wood he had been carving forgotten in his hands. Then a smile spread across his face, transforming him, making him look younger and lighter. "Truly, I believe so. It is early yet, but the signs are there." Quinn set down his carving and pulled her into his lap, holding her close. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our baby. Natalie, you have given me everything. A home, love, and now this. I do not deserve it." "You deserve it all and more," Natalie said fiercely. "You are the best man I have ever known." Quinn Barlow. The pregnancy progressed well through the winter months. Natalie suffered from morning sickness for a few weeks, but otherwise felt strong and healthy. Quinn became even more protective, if that was possible, refusing to let her lift anything heavy or work too hard. He pampered her shamelessly, and Natalie loved him all the more for it. In late January, they had a scare when a blizzard struck that lasted 3 days. The snow piled so high they could barely open the cabin door, and the wind howled like a living thing. They huddled by the fire, going out only when absolutely necessary to care for the animals. One of the chickens died from the cold, despite the shelter of the coop, and Quinn buried it in a snowdrift until the ground thawed enough to dispose of it properly. When the storm finally broke and they dug their way out, the world was transformed. The snow lay 4 feet deep in places, sculpted by the wind into fantastic shapes. The trees were burdened with white, and the sky, when it finally cleared, was a blue so intense it almost hurt to look at. "This is the worst it will get," Quinn told her as they stood outside the cabin, looking at the winter wilderness around them. "From here on, it will start getting gradually warmer. By March, the worst will be over." He was right. February brought more snow but fewer storms. March arrived with warmer temperatures and the first signs of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing the brown earth beneath, and Natalie could hear the sound of water running everywhere as the thaw progressed. By April, Natalie's pregnancy was obvious. Her belly had swelled into a round bump that Quinn loved to rest his hand on, feeling the baby move. They began to prepare in earnest for the birth. Quinn built a cradle from pine, carefully sanding every surface until it was smooth as silk. Natalie sewed baby clothes from soft fabric she had brought from town during their last trip before the heavy snows. They talked about names, arguing good-naturedly about whether they wanted to know the sex before birth or be surprised. "I think it is a boy," Quinn said one evening, his hand on her belly. "He kicks like a mule." Natalie corrected, "and she has every right to kick. It is crowded in there." But when the baby came in late May, after a long and difficult labor that left Natalie exhausted and Quinn nearly frantic with worry, they discovered Quinn had been right. The midwife from town, a practical woman named Martha Green whom Quinn had fetched when Natalie's labor started, handed them a squalling, red-faced boy. "He is perfect," Natalie whispered, cradling her son against her chest. Tears streamed down her face as she looked up at Quinn. "Look what we made." Quinn knelt beside the bed, his face wet with tears as well. He reached out with one huge, gentle finger to stroke the baby's cheek. "He is beautiful. You are both beautiful. Natalie, I love you more than words can say." They named him Thomas, after Natalie's uncle whose legacy had brought them together. Little Thomas was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them up at night with his demands but filled their days with joy. Quinn was a natural father, patient and gentle with the infant despite his size and strength. Natalie would often find him holding Thomas, rocking him and singing old songs in his deep, rumbling voice. As summer arrived and the high country bloomed with wildflowers, they settled into their new life as a family. Quinn worked hard to expand their farm, clearing more land for planting and building a larger barn. Natalie tended her garden, which flourished in the mountain soil, and cared for Thomas while managing the household. They had visitors occasionally. Other homesteaders would stop by to see the baby and share news. The community had fully accepted them now, seeing how hard they worked and how devoted they were to each other. A few of the women even asked Natalie for advice, which made her feel truly part of the mountain community. One evening in late July, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Thomas sleeping peacefully in his cradle beside them, Quinn took Natalie's hand. "Are you happy?" he asked. Natalie looked at him, this mountain man who had fixed her wagon and then followed her home, who had given her love and protection and a family. "More than I ever imagined I could be. Are you?" "Every day I wake up and think I must be dreaming," Quinn said. "That I will open my eyes and find myself back in my old cabin, alone. But then I see you beside me, and I hear Thomas crying, and I know it is real. You gave me a reason to live again, Natalie. You saved me." "We saved each other," Natalie corrected gently. She leaned against his shoulder, feeling his arm come around her, strong and sure. "That day on the trail when my wagon broke down, I thought it was the worst luck. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It brought me you." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had watched over them that first night when they had shared a meal by the campfire. So much had changed since then, yet the fundamentals remained the same. They were two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life together through hard work and determination and love. The years passed, bringing both challenges and triumphs. A second son, Michael, arrived when Thomas was 2 years old, another healthy boy with Quinn's green eyes and Natalie's dark hair. 2 years after that, they finally had a daughter, Sarah, who from birth had her father wrapped completely around her tiny finger. Quinn expanded their homestead steadily, building a proper house to replace the cabin, with 4 bedrooms and a large kitchen where Natalie could cook for their growing family. He cleared more land and planted orchards, apple and cherry trees that would take years to bear fruit, but represented his faith in their future. He built fences and corrals, bought cattle and horses, and slowly transformed the modest homestead into a thriving ranch. Natalie worked alongside him, managing the household and raising their children while also tending her garden and helping with the livestock. She learned to ride and shoot, skills she had never imagined needing back in St. Louis, but which were essential in the mountains. She became known in the community as a skilled healer, having learned about mountain herbs and remedies from the older women, and people would come from miles away when someone was sick or injured. Their children grew strong and healthy in the mountain air. Thomas became a quiet boy who loved working with his father, already showing Quinn's natural skill with animals and building. Michael was more outgoing, constantly exploring and getting into mischief, keeping Natalie on her toes. Sarah was bright and curious, following her mother everywhere and asking endless questions about everything she saw. On a warm evening in September 1888, 10 years after Quinn had first found Natalie on that mountain trail, they celebrated their 10th anniversary with a gathering of friends and neighbors. The yard of their ranch house was filled with people, children running and playing while adults talked and laughed. Tables laden with food covered the porch, and someone had brought a fiddle, filling the evening air with music. Quinn found Natalie standing a little apart from the crowd, watching their children play with the other youngsters. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I am thinking about how far we have come," Natalie said, leaning into his embrace. 10 years ago, I was alone and frightened, trying to fix a broken wagon in the middle of nowhere. And you were alone in your cabin in the mountains, thinking you would spend your life that way. Now look at us. We have built something real and lasting. We have a family, a community, a home." Quinn turned her in his arms so she faced him. At 38, he was still powerfully built, though his hair now showed touches of gray at the temples. His face bore the lines of years spent outdoors, but his green eyes were as intense as ever when they looked at her. "You are still the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he said. "I loved you the moment I saw you, even though I did not know it yet. Every day since has only made me love you more." Natalie reached up to cup his face, feeling the roughness of his beard under her palm. At 32, she bore the marks of hard work and childbearing, but she felt strong and vital and deeply happy. "I love you too, Quinn Barlow. My mountain man, my husband, my partner in everything. You are my home." They kissed there in the gathering dusk, surrounded by the sounds of celebration, and Natalie thought about all the broken wheels and chance meetings that had led them to this moment. Life was unpredictable and often hard, especially in the mountains, but it was also filled with unexpected grace. You just had to be brave enough to accept help when it was offered, and wise enough to recognize love when it appeared on a lonely mountain trail. Their story was not unusual for the time and place. Many couples met through chance encounters, built lives together through necessity that grew into love. But for Natalie and Quinn, it felt like destiny. Two lonely souls finding each other exactly when they needed to, in exactly the place they needed to be. As the years continued to roll by, their ranch prospered. Their children grew into capable young adults who knew the value of hard work and the importance of family. Thomas eventually married a girl from a neighboring ranch and stayed close to home, helping Quinn manage the growing operation. Michael, true to his adventurous nature, left for a time to see more of the world but always came back to the mountains he loved. Sarah became a teacher, establishing a small school on their property where the children of nearby homesteaders could learn. Quinn and Natalie grew older together, their love deepening with each passing season. They faced hardships, as everyone did. Harsh winters that killed livestock, a fire that destroyed their barn and had to be rebuilt, illness and injury that tested their strength. But they faced everything together, their partnership unshakable. They became the elder statesmen of their community, the couple that younger families looked to for advice and support. People still talked about how they had met, the mountain man who had found the woman with the broken wagon and had known, somehow, that his life was about to change forever. On a spring morning in 1910, Quinn woke in the house they had built together over 30 years before. He was 62 now, his hair completely gray, his body still strong but bearing the accumulated aches and pains of a life spent in hard physical labor. Beside him, Natalie slept peacefully, her dark hair now streaked with silver, her face peaceful in repose. He watched her sleep for a moment, this woman who had given him everything, and felt the same surge of love and gratitude he had felt that first night when she had agreed to marry him. They had built a good life together, raised fine children, and created something that would last beyond them. Their grandchildren, 7 so far with more likely on the way, would carry on what they had started. Natalie stirred and opened her eyes, finding him watching her. "Good morning, husband," she said, smiling. "Good morning, wife," Quinn replied, leaning over to kiss her softly. They rose and dressed, moving with the ease of long habit. Downstairs, they found Thomas already up and starting the breakfast fire. He lived in a house nearby with his wife and children, but he often came over early to help with chores and share the morning meal with his parents. "Morning, Ma, Pa," he said, looking up from the stove. I figured I would get a head start. Michael is bringing his family over later. Something about wanting to talk about expanding the north pasture. Quinn and Natalie exchanged a smile. Their children still sought their input on important decisions, still valued their experience and wisdom. It was gratifying to know that what they had built would continue, would grow and change but remain rooted in the values they had instilled. After breakfast, Quinn went out to tend to the horses while Natalie worked in her garden. It was spring, time for planting, and the earth was soft and rich under her hands. She had been working for about an hour when she heard hoofbeats approaching and looked up to see a young couple in a wagon coming down the road toward their house. The wagon looked heavily loaded, and as it drew closer, Natalie could see that one of the wheels was wobbling dangerously. The young woman at the reins looked worried, and the young man beside her was clearly trying to reassure her. Natalie straightened, pressing a hand to her lower back, and called toward the barn, "Quinn, we have visitors and it looks like they might need some help." Quinn emerged from the barn and watched the wagon approach. When he saw the wobbling wheel, he moved quickly, intercepting the wagon before it could go much further. "Hold up there," he called. "That wheel is about to give out. Better stop before it breaks completely." The young couple pulled their wagon to a stop, relief evident on their faces. The woman, who could not have been more than 20, climbed down carefully, and Natalie could see she was in the early stages of pregnancy. "Thank goodness," the woman said. "We have been nursing that wheel along for miles, hoping we could make it to our homestead before it broke. I am Emma Patterson, and this is my husband James. We just came out from Kansas. We have got a claim about 10 miles north of here." Quinn was already examining the wheel, his experienced hands running over the damaged wood. "This is not going to make another mile, let alone 10. I have got a spare wheel that should fit, and I can have you fixed up in less than an hour." James Patterson looked both grateful and worried. "We cannot pay much, sir. We spent most of our money on supplies and the filing fees for our claim." Quinn straightened, and Natalie saw him smile, the same smile he had given her all those years ago on a mountain trail. "No need for payment. Out here we help each other. That is just how it is." Natalie moved forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "Please, come inside and rest while my husband fixes your wagon. You look tired, my dear. When is your baby due?" Emma looked surprised at the kindness but grateful. "Late October, the doctor said. We are hoping to have our cabin built and supplies laid in before winter." As Natalie led Emma toward the house, she glanced back to see Quinn and James examining the wagon, Quinn already explaining what needed to be done. She felt a warm glow of satisfaction, seeing her husband offer the same help to this young couple that he had once offered to her. Inside, over tea and fresh bread, Emma told Natalie their story. How they had married young, how James's family farm had failed in a drought, how they had decided to come west and start over with a homestead claim. It was a familiar story, one Natalie knew well. She offered advice and reassurance, telling Emma about the challenges of mountain life but also about the rewards. "It will be hard," Natalie said honestly, "especially the first winter, but if you work together and accept help when it is offered, you will make it. My husband and I did, and we built something good. You can too." When Quinn had the wheel fixed and the Pattersons were ready to continue their journey, he gave them directions to their claim and offered to stop by in a few days to help them with their cabin if they needed it. Emma hugged Natalie impulsively, tears in her eyes. "Thank you both so much," she said. "You have given us hope." As the young couple drove away, their wagon rolling smoothly on its new wheel, Natalie slipped her hand into Quinn's. They stood together, watching the wagon disappear down the road, and Natalie felt the circle of their lives complete itself. "We were them once," she said softly. We were, Quinn agreed. Scared and hopeful and trying to build something from nothing. And we succeeded. Look at what we have built, Quinn. Not just this ranch, but a family, a community. We have lived a good life. Quinn pulled her close, and she rested her head against his chest, still as solid and strong as it had been 3 decades before. The best life, he said. Because I found you on that trail trying to fix that wagon all alone. Best day of my life. Mine too, Natalie whispered. Even though I did not know it at the time. They stood there for a long time. 2 people who had found each other when they most needed to. Who had built a life based on hard work, mutual respect, and deep, abiding love. Around them, the mountains rose eternal, the same mountains that had witnessed the beginning of their story and would stand long after they were gone, a testament to the permanence of the wild places that had brought them together. Inside the house, they could hear Thomas moving around, preparing for Michael's arrival. Soon the house would fill with family, with children and grandchildren, with laughter and conversation, and the comfortable chaos of people who loved each other. But for this moment, it was just the 2 of them, Quinn and Natalie, the mountain man and the woman with the broken wagon, still holding hands after all these years, still choosing each other every day. That evening, with their family gathered around the large dining table that Quinn had built years ago, Natalie looked around at the faces she loved and felt overwhelming gratitude. Thomas and his wife, their 3 children. Michael and his wife, their 2 children. Sarah, not yet married but courting a young man from town who looked at her with adoration. And Quinn at the head of the table, still strong and protective, still the center of their world. After dinner, when the dishes were washed and the children were playing outside in the lingering twilight, the adults sat on the porch and talked. Michael had indeed wanted to discuss expanding the north pasture, and Quinn listened to his ideas with pride, occasionally offering suggestions but mostly letting his son take the lead. Thomas added his thoughts, and the 3 men talked ranching while the women discussed Sarah's courtship and the school, and everyone simply enjoyed being together. Later, when everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Quinn and Natalie prepared for bed. They moved through their nighttime routine with the ease of 30 years of practice, banking the fire, checking the doors, putting out the lamps. In their bedroom, they undressed and climbed into the bed they had shared for so long, and Quinn pulled Natalie into his arms. I love our family, Natalie said. Everything we have built together, but I love these quiet moments with you most of all. Me too, Quinn murmured into her hair. You are still my favorite person in the world, Natalie Barlow. After all these years, I still love you more than anything. And I love you, Natalie replied. My mountain man, my husband, my home. They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, 2 souls who had found each other on a lonely mountain trail and had built a life beyond anything either had dared to dream. Outside, the mountains stood silent under the stars, keeping watch over the house where love had taken root and flourished, where 2 broken people had found healing in each other and had created something beautiful and lasting. The seasons turned, as seasons do. Summer brought warmth and long days of work. Fall brought the harvest and preparations for winter. Winter brought snow and cold and the cozy warmth of the house Quinn had built. Spring brought renewal and planting and the promise of another year. Through it all, Quinn and Natalie remained the constant center of their growing family. They celebrated births and weddings, mourned losses when old friends passed, and continued to work their ranch with the same dedication they had always shown. They grew older, their bodies slowing but their spirits remaining strong. On their 40th anniversary in 1898, their children threw them a grand party that drew people from all over the region. Nearly 100 people came to celebrate the couple who had become legendary in the mountain community. The Mountain Man and His Lady, people called them, a love story that had stood the test of time. Quinn, now 70 years old but still remarkably strong, stood before the gathered crowd with Natalie beside him. Their children and grandchildren surrounded them, and he felt a surge of emotion as he looked at all the faces watching him expectantly. "Most of you know our story," he began, his voice still deep and carrying despite his age. "How I found Natalie on a mountain trail with a broken wagon, how I fixed it and could not seem to stop coming back. But what you might not know is that from that very first moment, I knew my life had changed. I did not know how or why, but I knew that woman was special, and I was right. She has given me 40 years of happiness, raised 3 fine children with me, and helped me build something that will last long after we are gone." He turned to Natalie, taking both her hands in his. Her hair was completely white now, her face lined with age, but to him, she was as beautiful as the day he had first seen her. "I love you, Natalie. I have loved you every day since I found you on that trail, and I will love you until I take my last breath and beyond." Natalie, tears streaming down her face, squeezed his hands. "And I love you, Quinn Barlow. You saved me in more ways than you will ever know. You gave me a home, a family, and a love I never thought I would find. These 40 years have been the greatest gift of my life." They kissed to thunderous applause and cheers, and the celebration continued late into the night. But for Quinn and Natalie, the real celebration was simply in having each other, in knowing that they had built something true and lasting. As they approached the end of their lives, Quinn and Natalie spent increasing amounts of time simply being together, reminiscing about their long life and marveling at all they had experienced. They had seen the mountains change, had watched as more and more settlers arrived, as the wild frontier slowly became more civilized. They had seen their children grow and have children of their own, had watched their grandchildren begin to have families. On a crisp fall morning in 1912, Quinn woke to find Natalie still sleeping beside him. At 72, she was frailer than she had been, though her spirit remained strong. He watched her sleep, memorizing every line of her beloved face, and felt an overwhelming surge of gratitude for every moment they had shared. When she woke, they spent the morning sitting on the porch together, watching the autumn leaves fall and the mountains stand eternal against the blue sky. They held hands and talked quietly, not about anything important, just the comfortable conversation of 2 people who knew each other completely. "You have any regrets?" Natalie asked at one point. Quinn thought about it seriously, then shook his head. "None. How could I regret anything about a life that brought me you? Even the hard times, the winters when we barely had enough food, the times we thought we might lose the ranch, even those," Quinn confirmed. "Because we faced them together and they made us stronger. What about you? Any regrets?" Natalie smiled. "Only that I did not meet you sooner, but then, maybe we would not have appreciated each other as much if we had not both known loneliness and struggle first. I think we found each other at exactly the right time." "I think you are right," Quinn agreed. They sat in peaceful silence, these 2 people who had found each other against all odds and had built a life that mattered. Around them, the mountains stood unchanged, the same mountains that had witnessed their first meeting and would stand as a monument to their love long after they were gone. Quinn Barlow passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1915, at the age of 77. He simply did not wake up one morning, lying beside the woman he had loved for nearly 40 years. Natalie held his hand and wept, but she was also grateful. He had lived a long, full life, and had died without suffering, surrounded by the love he had built. Natalie followed him 3 months later, on a spring morning when the mountains were covered with wild flowers. Her children found her in her garden, where she had apparently sat down to rest, and simply never gotten up again. On her face was a peaceful smile, and those who saw her said it looked like she was seeing something beautiful just beyond their sight. They buried Quinn and Natalie side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, with a view of the mountains they had both loved. The entire community turned out for the funeral, and people came from hundreds of miles away to pay their respects to the couple who had become a legend. The mountain man and his lady, who had found each other on a remote trail and had built an empire of love. Their children and grandchildren kept the ranch going, honoring the memory of the couple who had started it all. The story of how Quinn had found Natalie trying to fix her broken wagon, how he had fixed it fast and followed her home, became a family legend passed down through generations. It was a story about courage and kindness, about taking chances and recognizing love when it appeared, about building something lasting through hard work and dedication. Years later, their great-grandchildren would stand on that same hill and look out at the mountains and the ranch spread out below, and they would tell the story of Quinn and Natalie. How two lonely people had found each other in the wilderness, how they had built a life together that had impacted countless others, how their love had been the foundation for everything that came after. The mountains remained, eternal and unchanging, keeping the secrets of all those who had lived and loved within their shadow. But if you listened carefully on quiet evenings, some said you could almost hear the echo of two voices, a man's deep rumble and a woman's warm laughter, still finding joy in each other after all these years. The mountain man and the woman with the broken wagon, together forever in the wild country they had called home, their love story complete and perfect and eternal as the mountains themselves.